Good evening and welcome to oh my gosh, I forgot what I'm doing tonight, Hunter. Thank you so much for showing up. No, not showing up. Thank you for being here for Conversations Aren't Showing Up for Kids.
There you go.
This is our Autism Acceptance Month, where we're combining it with Governor Evers has also declared this the year of mental health in Wisconsin. And so we wanted to bring together autism and mental health and have these important conversations about the intersections with that. And
we already have our first question in the chat, by the way, asking where can we find the video after this is done?
Oh, that's a great question. And thanks to Lisa, we are recording. And because you registered, as long as you registered and gave me a valid email address, we'll let you know where to find that. It will be on our autism acceptance page, possibly where you registered. So we will get that out to you. Not tonight, folks. Not doing it tonight, but I'll work on it tomorrow. I promise.
You make a lot of promises.
No, I do. I keep 90%.
This is going to be one of them.
All right, then, as long as you hold me to it.
I will hold you to it.
Cool. So tonight we're going to talk about risk factors, warning signs, crisis support, suicide prevention for the autism community. What are some considerations to take when assessing autistic people for suicide when using the warning signs for the general public? How can we communicate with and support autistic people in crisis? We're welcoming in Lisa Morgan. Lisa is a consultant specializing in crisis supports and suicide prevention for autistic people. Spoiler alert, I've heard her before. And I really like it. That's why she's here.
I haven't, so this is the first time I've ever heard you speak.
Lisa is founder and co-chair of the Autism and Society Committee at the American Association of Suicidology, has developed several autism-specific resources for communicating and supporting autistic people in crisis. She's a self-advocate with a passion for strengths-based solution. She's authored several books, articles, resources, which are available from her website, autismcrisissupport.com. She's a community member of ASET, the Autistic Adults and Other Stakeholders Engaged Together, a group of autistic adults informing autism research priorities. She has a master's degree in the art of teaching, is a certified autism specialist, a pre-reviewer of the online journal Autism in Adulthood, and owner of Lisa Morgan Consulting, LLC. She's currently pursuing her master's of social work, and we are thrilled that you have taken time out of your really busy schedule to be here with us tonight, Lisa. So welcome. I am going to go ahead and spotlight you, pin you, so that's you and the video, and I'll keep an eye on our chat, and we'll talk at the end. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Tim. And thank you to Hunter. Okay, so I am going to be talking about autism and suicide. And so I just like to put these numbers up here at the beginning of the presentation, just in case anyone gets triggered or needs some support. You can jot these down right now, whether you like to call or text, just in case anybody needs support. And what I'm going to talk mostly about in this presentation through the resources and different supportive interventions that I'm going to share with you is this idea of unintentional harm. And it truly is unintentional. It's done by well-meaning, supportive people, whether they're first responders or clinicians or sometimes, family friends don't understand autism from a social model. And also autistic people react differently in a crisis. And so people don't understand exactly how to support an autistic person. Communication plays a part in the unintentional harm that autistic people can experience, as well as the different kind of supports that autistic people need. The reason why I got into doing this advocacy work is I lost 2 family members to suicide in 2015. One was a nephew, and then 3 months later, my husband. And during the night that we found my husband, there was a lot of supportive people from 6 to 10 in my home and neighborhood to help. But at the same time, all the support they gave me was just didn't quite land for me. And so I felt unsupported. So that's why I do this work. and then we can go to what do we know about autism and suicide? We do have more research now than when I started, which is really good. There's one study that shows 60% of the newly diagnosed autistic adults reported suicidal ideation, and that's compared to 17% in the general population for this one study done by Cassidy et al. 35% had planned or attempted suicide compared to 2.5%. So the suicide rate is pretty high in the autism community. And a lot of people who support autistic people, if they find out, they're autistic, they don't even assess for suicide. So that's why we really need to have these trainings that Tim's putting on tonight and get the word out. As far as children and adolescents, there is suicidal ideation that's been shown in research, as well as suicidal ideation and suicidal behavior, even in children under 10 years old, autistic children. So we know that autistic individuals are significantly more likely to think about, attempt, and die by suicide than the general population. And we know that suicide is a leading cause of premature death in autistic people. Some research says it's second leading cause, and then there's other research says it's in the top 3, but it's definitely a leading cause. And then research has found that there are unique risk factors of suicide for autistic people. And I'm going to go through them. The first one, co-occurring psychiatric conditions. There was a study, a very large study done in Denmark. It was over like a 20-year period, had 6.5 million people in it. It was a very large study. And out of the autistic people in the study who had attempted or died by suicide, 90% of them had a co-occurring psychiatric condition, with the most common being anxiety and affective disorders. So it is a unique risk factor of suicide for autistic people, as well as lack of social support and unmet support needs. And it's really a number of unmet support needs. And I usually do these two together because they definitely do go together. Because social support, reaching out and asking for help, is a social skill. And it's really difficult if you've never done it before, if you've done it for, for the first time, or it's a new person or place that you're reaching out for help. A lot of autistic people may need assistance in doing that. They may not understand who to reach out to, or what to ask, or what information is important to tell at what time. And if they do reach out, many times it's a negative experience due to misunderstandings in communication. I work with a lot of autistic adults who are experiencing suicidality or have had, trauma with just reaching out for help. They using the crisis line sometimes is not what people think it is. So a lot of times autistic people will be told, well, call the crisis line or text the crisis line, but they are often met with that unintentional harm that I talked about before. And then number of unmet support needs. These can be anywhere between mental health challenges to employment, and that's getting employment, getting through the interview. It's even being employed according to, your abilities. Sometimes autistic people work beneath what they're capable of doing because the communication and getting a job, keeping a job, working with colleagues, managing the environment. There's a lot of different factors that go in there. Housing, being able to find a place, being able to keep a place, whether it's a home or you're renting or you're living in a place where there's other people, the communication there and getting along with everybody, and, the executive functioning of paying bills and things like that. Education, I have a lot of clients who are college age and they're having difficulty, obtaining their degrees, and it's actually kind of traumatic for them. And then, grade school as well can be difficult for autistic people. And then relationships in general, because it is a social communication condition. So all these all together are a unique risk factor of suicide for autistic people. Next is camouflaging or masking. And this is a social strategy. It does have a purpose. You can fit in with your peers and your colleagues, your friends, your family by masking your autistic traits. The whole goal is to try to look and act like everyone else so you don't stand out as different. The cost is exhaustion because of what it takes to mask. So, kind of suppressing all the sensory stimulation in your environment, and then standing in a certain distance apart, making sure you're standing in the right place, making sure you're standing in the right posture, and listening to the conversation that's going on and trying to keep up with it. At the same time, keeping the right emotion on your face. I mean, there's just a lot of things to do when you're masking. And so there's that exhaustion. And that's why a lot of people have to regulate after having a social event or being in school or being at work all day. It also can develop a lack of a sense of self, especially if you are diagnosed later in life. Although it does pertain to people who are diagnosed earlier in life too. Just a lack of sense of self, because when you mask for so long, you kind of lose out who you are, because you're just trying to act like someone else all the time. And it's a lack of support, because when you do reach out for support while you're masking, you're going to get supported as a non-autistic person because you're suppressing all your autistic characteristics and traits. And so the support is off, and then not being known for who you are as a person, just can be profoundly lonely. You can spend, time going to social events, school, work, and you are acting in a way that's not your true self. And you realize at some point, nobody even knows who I am as a person. It does help autistic people to socialize. But they know there's that thing too, where if you show your true self, if you stemmed, if you did, maybe some echolalia, where you're repeating sounds and phrases that you are, kind of love and would like to repeat. And a lot of autistic people do some echolalia. If you do that, if you do any kind of autistic trait, you may be rejected, because a lot of autistic people have that history. So it also hinders relationships, because when you do make a friend while you're masking, and you further that relationship on and you get closer, and you start showing some of your autistic traits, and then they wonder, what is this? And you change, and it just kind of hinders the relationship process. And again, if it just leads to profound loneliness and not belonging, which is why it is a unique risk factor of suicide. Late diagnosis as well for all of the above. Being a female, autistic female diagnosed, tends to be later in life. A lot of autistic females have been misdiagnosed leading up to their diagnosis, which can be traumatic in itself. To have a diagnosis that's usually something that you don't feel and you've been given, and it's a label, and you're still searching and you're trying to find out who you are as a person. And then there's autistic burnout. That's also a unique risk factor. And what autism burnout is, it's an intense physical, mental, and or emotional exhaustion. It's not depression, really. It's just exhaustion. And it can come with a loss of skills, a regression of skills. It comes from living in a world that's not made for autistic people. So the environments, the communication, the relationships, the every part of every day that is confusing. And autistic adults who are able to live independently are especially affected. It also can vary from person to person as far as severity. It can be a result of camouflaging and masking. And people have more difficulty in managing their emotions than usual, because it has to do with that regression of skills and being able to regulate. So they may be prone to outbursts of sadness, anger, depression, anxiety, increased sensitivity to change, which is already kind of a very difficult thing for a lot of autistic people, and can lead to suicidal thoughts and behaviors. This paper, I usually put this paper in here because it's a very, very good paper that explains autistic burnout, in case anybody wants to know more information about it. So this toolkit, the Autism Crisis Toolkit, was the first toolkit developed with the Autism and Suicide Committee. And what it was for crisis center workers originally, but right now it's being used in all kinds of different areas by professionals, family friends, first responders get trainings on it as well. What it does is it identifies autistic callers or texters, and then it promotes effective communication, and then has support for autistic people that is autism specific. So the structure is, it explains unique characteristics of autism, and then it suggests practical ways to support an autistic person in crisis. And then there's a one-page bulleted summary to use in real time. And that was for the crisis center workers. So in identifying, what the toolkit shows is that somebody who may be expressing sensory difficulties, they can have a powerful impact on an autistic person. It's going to be unique to each person. It can cause a regression of skills, and it has most likely to do with the environment, although overload from other things can happen as well. But if somebody is talking about these things, they may be autistic. That's the identifying feature. It's also supportive to know these things about an autistic person, about the sensory difficulties, and keeping them safe and moving them to another environment would be supportive. They also may present with opposite emotions. So autistic people don't always present with what they're feeling. They may be having this raging hurricane of emotions inside and look perfectly calm. They may, be visibly upset and not be as in crisis as they are when they look calm. It could be different. So it's so important when supporting autistic people in crisis, that making assumptions based on the seriousness of their crisis, based on their presentation or how they're acting, is can cause a misunderstanding, and it can lead to miscommunication. And for crisis center workers, can result in an ineffective call or interaction. But for anybody, it can just be the difference between knowing how to support them and not being able to support them. Difficulty identifying or verbalizing emotions. That's called alexithymia. A lot of autistic people have it. Research has recently come out that 50% of autistic people have alexithymia. And so if an autistic person states they don't know how they're feeling, it's probably a true literal statement. So a lot of people, when they say, "How are you?" they say, they might say fine, but autistic people, you tend to, get the honest, blatant, honest truth, which is refreshing to me. But they, again, if they may say that they're in a crisis and not look that way. They may explain their emotions in a different way. They may not be able to say, "I feel angry, sad, frustrated, scared." They may say, "I feel the way I did when nobody came to my birthday party," or "I feel the same way I did when I was really looking forward to the picnic and it rained." Some sort of other kind of explanation about how they feel that relates to experience they had. But giving them time to identify or explain their emotions is helpful and supportive. And then literal thinking and understanding. Autistic people tend to be very literal in how they think and perceive the world. So again, with crisis center workers or anybody who's supporting an autistic person through a phone call or a text, it would make it difficult to help the autistic person to trust the person they're reaching out to. And words are a way to build up trust. So if you're on a call with somebody and you may say, "Well, we're in this together." Well, you're not, because if you're on a call, you're not in the same room. So that's going to could confuse the autistic person and already start dampening that trust that, the supporting person wants to build. So just, and also finding out what you might want to know about them, and what they need. Asking literal questions is going to be really important because they listen literally as well. So, I don't hear social nuance. I take everything very literally myself. So when people might ask me something, especially in a crisis, when you're having a regression of skills and you're having difficulty processing and you're having, a lot of emotions, even though you can't explain what they are, you're still experiencing them. It's going to be very hard to understand what someone might mean if they're using figurative language. So perseveration is another identifying factor, of, you might be supporting an autistic person. This is if they don't disclose or may not even know they're autistic, if a lot of people are diagnosed later in life. Perseveration is a rumination of thoughts. It can be positive thoughts, it can be negative thoughts. In a crisis, an autistic person perseverating on negative thoughts may have a really hard time shifting their thinking to more positive thoughts, which is a lot of times the goal. If something's happened and they've had a negative experience somehow, and trying to get them out of that can be difficult with the perseveration. To a volunteer, somebody supporting them, crisis worker, it could be perceived as they're not listening, because like I'm trying to redirect you and it's not working, or refusing to cooperate or being done on purpose, and none of that would be the case. Always have to keep in mind when you think you might be supporting somebody on the spectrum, or you're supporting somebody on the spectrum, that perseveration can be very, very strong and difficult to stop. Processing speeds, they vary. Varying processing speeds are not related to intelligence. Always presume competence when working with autistic people. Processing speed can be negatively correlated to anxiety. So the higher the anxiety, the slower the processing speed. And autistic people may take longer to respond to questions or to people in general. So if you're on a call and that's how you're supporting them, asking if they haven't talked in a while, just asking few words as possible, straight to the point. Are you done talking? Do you want to get off the phone call or text? Just to check in, see if they're still there, see if they still want to talk. It still may take them a while to answer, but checking in with them is very supportive. After my husband had died by suicide, I had called the crisis center a couple of times during different difficulty, at different times I was having difficulty. And that happened to me a couple of times. I was just trying to process what I wanted to say, and the call was ended. So, just making sure you check in and understand the processing speed can slow down is supportive. So kind of in all of what we want to remember is not using social nuance, purposefully and literally and honestly and concisely asking what you want to know from the autistic person. It's so important. And a lot of non-autistic people think that, getting straight to the point, using few words as possible, and being very, very honest is rude and blunt. But autistic people, kind of find it refreshing because they don't have to figure out what you're talking about. They don't have to, kind of wade through all of those words to find out what the point is. So actually clear is kindness, especially when supporting autistic people. So this part is really, really important. Autistic people have can have a very different inner experience than they present on the outside. That has a lot to do with masking and a lot to do with emotions and alexithymia, and not really maybe even feeling what your emotions are, except maybe having a headache or a stomach ache or your shoulders are tight can clue you into that you're upset or having some kind of emotions, but you may not feel them if you have alexithymia. So not assessing an autistic person based on their presentation is going to be so, so crucially important to helping them in the right way. And also, if they can't if they've lost their words, which happens a lot of times, it's also happened to me, where the more I'm in a crisis, the less I can verbally speak. And so, they may be able to be verbally explain what they need. Autistic people may need to write something down. They may use a card. There's cards out there that they may have some information on them. They may use an assistive device. They may be able to draw what's going on for them, but offering different kind of modes of communication is supportive. And then to listen to what they're telling you, even if it goes against what you're seeing. So if somebody comes up to you as calm as I appear right now and says that they're in a crisis, their words would have to have more weight than what they look like and what they're acting like. If they say they're panicking and have high anxiety and look as calm as I do right now, they could still be, their words need to have the words will have the truth. And you have to really, to be supportive, go by what they're saying. And so that is so very important, because if you think about it, if you're supporting people and you walk into a room and there's 3 people in the room and one of them is sitting quietly and one of them is crying quietly and one of them is pacing and crying, the person that you just kind of automatically think needs the most attention is the one that's pacing and crying. And the one that needs the least attention is the one that's sitting quietly. That's a kind of a normal reaction to whom, if you have to kind of triage, right? That's kind of your normal reasoning and reaction. But for autistic people, the one sitting quietly could be in the most crisis. And that's just something that really needs to be understood and remembered when supporting autistic people. And then in the same toolkit, there are interventions, but I wanted to put this in here first. I really like to have people use the strengths of autistic people. And there are strengths to autistic people. Autistic people tend to be creative. So if they are able to help solve their own crisis, just being there, creating the space for them to communicate and helping them to, figure out what they need to do for themselves is supportive. They tend to be very honest. So asking them if they are going to, harm themselves, if they are having thoughts of suicide, you're going to probably get an honest answer. Adheres to routine, that can be very, very helpful to stay safe. Once they have a safety plan, to get into routine of when I'm feeling a certain way, or I've stopped texting people that I usually text, or I'm withdrawing more, I need to get out my safety plan, having that be part of a routine. Detail-oriented can be wonderful in filling out a safety plan. Rule-based can also keep people safe. So if I'm feeling like I'm going to harm myself in some way, my rule is, I text this person this one emoji and they know what it means. And now I'm going to get support. Or I don't go in the bathroom because that's where maybe some medicine is kept or something. And you just have different rules for different people for different situations. And if they're rule-based, you can pretty much count on that rule being followed. And they tend to be fair, when thinking about how much their family and friends are going to, miss them, love them, and don't want them to hurt themselves or harm themselves. And, and they can problem solve as well. So strengths, autistic people really need to be included in keeping them safe and supporting them, as well as the challenges that autistic people face, like sensory issues. Sensory issues need to be understood. That could be causing somebody to go into a crisis. Executive functioning, the working out of how you're going to use that safety plan or how you're going to keep somebody safe. Social situations are always difficult for autistic people, are very, very commonly difficult. Communication in just trying to get out what they need and tell somebody and, get the support that they need, or build a support network. Communication can be a challenge. The rigidity of change, and up at the top there, change itself can be difficult. Perseveration, again, can be difficult to get out of a negative thought loop. Rumination is usually trying to solve a problem. Like I know autistic people can ruminate on a conversation they've been part of that they didn't feel kind of right about it for a couple of weeks, just trying to, going through every word, the posture of each person, just every single part of the conversation that they, kind of felt bad about. They could ruminate, pick it apart, and that can also be a challenge when supporting them. The co-occurring disorders, the slower processing speed, not being able to, alexithymia, not being able to explain or, even kind of know what emotions you're having can be a challenge. And then sleep just kind of adds kind of angst to everything if you can't get the sleep that you need. So I'm going to go through some interventions. They're all right here. Each one of these bullets has a slide that I'm going to go through just to kind of look at how you can support autistic people in crisis. So asking direct questions, just being very clear and direct, use as few words as possible, getting straight to the point, and always, always, always presume competence. Even if you have an autistic person that you're supporting that does not speak verbally, presume competence, and just find out how they communicate. And then it is so important when you are in a crisis and you're trying to figure out so many different things to have the person supporting you to speak clearly. Allowing extra time to process thoughts and formulate words is very supportive. So like for crisis center workers, there's a way to ask if they're still there. And if you're supporting somebody on the phone, while respecting their need to process. And an autistic person cannot hurry up their processing time. In fact, hurrying up their processing time is going to slow it down. So, I experienced that night when I had to talk to the police. My anxiety was so high. My processing speed was so low. So slow. I could not make eye contact with the police sergeant who was just firing questions at me. I was pretty sure that he was, convinced I was lying because I couldn't make eye contact. I couldn't answer his questions. His questions weren't really hard. They were just, my mind was not working as fast as I wanted to. And, the only way to help that would have been if I was able to pace and regulate for a little bit and then go back and talk to him, which I was not allowed to do. So it's very supportive to allow space and allow time. And then helping to shift the thoughts, those, ruminating, perseverating thoughts to positive, it can be very difficult. But if you can find what they're interested in, that may be enough to pull them out of a perseverative or loop of negative, whatever happened for them. Most autistic people have an intense level of focus about their special interests. And if you can ask them what it is, if you don't know them, or if you do know them, start talking about it, that may be enough to pull them out, but otherwise it would just take time and regulation. So language to avoid, metaphors, social nuance, any kind of social nuance, idioms, similes, any kind of figurative language. A lot of autistic people have memorized a lot of the common idioms. If they hear an idiom or a metaphor or a simile that they aren't, haven't heard before, it might still be confusing to them if they're not in a crisis. But in a crisis situation, it's so hard. You're doing so many things. Your mind is slow. You're trying to process a lot, and to be able to have to work through what does that idiom mean again, it's a lot. And so to be supportive, avoiding this language is good. And speaking words of logic instead of words of emotion. So instead of, using these words I have listed on the slide here, are you frustrated about this? Are you angry? Are you sad? Like what, trying to figure out what's happening. they just may not be able to answer that. And so, using words of logic. So usually what I do is tell this, example about a house fire. So if somebody had a house fire, a non-autistic person may use a lot of um, language, emotional language, like I was so scared. I was fearful. I, I was disappointed. I just feel, and see, I'm having trouble using emotional words right now. But an autistic person may say the fire started at 8 p.m. and there were 5 people in the house and they all got out and we got the cat and the fire trucks arrived and 13 minutes later. And they're just going to talk logic. So when you're supporting an autistic person, that's kind of what you want to do too. And then using positive coping skills, which are sometimes referred to as distraction strategies, such as going for a walk, watching TV, listening to music, maybe doing their special interest. We heard back from a lot of autistic people saying that when they have reached out for help on crisis lines or text lines, or even from other people together in real life, they thought that their crisis or their anxiety or angst was being minimized by telling them to, just go watch some TV or go take a walk or, go do this. And they didn't understand what it was for. So explaining why watching TV or going for a walk or listening to music might help will be very, very supportive for an autistic person, especially if they've never had to use coping skills before and they're not familiar with it in any way. They may think that their pain is being minimized and they're being dismissed instead of you being supportive. When facilitating a safety plan, if that's part of how you're going to support them, you want to help them make the connections to people or resources. And they may have never done, you have to keep in mind, they may have never done this before. So they don't know who to talk to, where to go, what to say, even if they have to go there in person, how to get there. Useful information just to be successful in getting, help in trying to work out how they can be safe. Because making connections requires social skills. And in the time leading up to my husband's death, I did go out and try to get some help at this one place. I was encouraged strongly to go and to try to get some help for myself and my 2 young boys. They were 10 and 11 at the time. And I did. It took me a lot to walk in the building. I was in tears outside, just the angst. I'd never done it before. I didn't know who to talk to, I just had no idea what was going to happen. And so when I got myself in the building and got myself to the right person, I thought I was doing really well. I was sitting in a chair. They were behind a desk. And I told them what was going on. And they laughed. And to this day, I don't know why they laughed. I don't know if it was the way I told my story. My story was not funny. I don't know, but I got up and I left because that was way too much for me to have a reaction of a laugh. And so, that's partly, their reaction and partly my fleeing because I didn't know what to do. Just didn't help that day for me. So, it can be difficult even when an autistic person is successful in other areas, just because they've never seriously ever done that before. So practicing what to say, going over what, give them a script, maybe even if they need one, of what they want to ask for, and just figure out anything they might need, how to get there. If they're talking by phone, how do they get the phone number? Who do they ask for? I mean, just anything that you can help them to facilitate connections and stay safe. And then for support, you want to get them connected. They may be connected. You have to find out too. They may be connected in some way. They may be not connected at all and never have been. They may have been before and haven't in a long time, and they need to reconnect maybe with some people. You want to get them some professional care if that's appropriate. and getting the right care for them. And it would be, asking questions and really walking through what they need to do step by step. They may have family friends, they may have some people online, they may have no support. So for the short term, you want to make at least one connection with them so that they have somebody that they can reach out and they know when they, if they need support, they have one person. And then eventually, of course, long time building a circle of support would be the best thing to do. And then this next toolkit resource is considerations of warning signs. This is when assessing autistic people for suicide using the warning signs of the general public. And so the purpose of it is to first understand the need for considerations. Why do we need to have considerations for autistic people? Recognizing the differences and then supporting them as autistic people. So the structure of the resource is that it states the warning signs for the general public and then shows need for considerations for each of them, and then shows along the way how to support autistic people. Here are the warning signs for the general public. I believe that I'm not going to do all of them, although most of them are in here tonight. And I'm going to go through and show what I mean about considerations to take. I do always like to stop and say to not make any important life-altering decisions based on the information in the following slides. All the warning signs for the general public do pertain to autistic people too, just with considerations about autism. This information here is only to broaden existing knowledge about autistic people and to remember that autistic people know the most about themselves. Always presume competence. The job of professionals helping really is to make space for them to communicate what they need. And then again, the thinking is very literal. So considering exactly what you want to say is always going to be helpful. And what I mean by this, talking about warning signs, is it can be as simple as you asking somebody, do you want to hurt yourself? That's kind of a common way of asking. And they may say no because they don't want to hurt themselves, but they're planning on hurting themselves. So asking the right question to get the right answer is going to be very important. You might want to say, are you thinking of hurting yourself or harming yourself? And so that's very, very literal when you want to ask, when you want to find out information, you got to ask it in the right way for autistic people to be most supportive. This first warning sign of suicide for the general public, no reason for living, no sense of purpose in life. An autistic person may feel this way simply due to social isolation, and a professional can take, I don't belong into this world, I've never fit into this world. They could be, explain that they're possibly suicidal, but they also might be just telling their reality. It may just be the reality of an autistic person that they don't belong to this world, and that's how they've experienced it. Culturally, socially, environmentally, they don't belong, they don't fit. And so consideration to take here is it a true literal statement, or are they saying something, because they're suicidal? So really using the communication from styles from the first toolkit we just went through and asking them, investigating, would be supportive here. Because we don't want, see if I can say this tonight, we don't want an autistic person to be deemed suicidal when they're just being autistic. And we don't want an autistic person to be just thought of as being autistic when they're really suicidal. So we want to really get right to what's happening for this person. So anxiety, agitation, and sleep issues, this is a warning sign of suicide, and also aspects of autism. So how do you know if there's signs of suicide or if it's just aspects of autism? I don't know of an autistic person that doesn't have sleep issues or anxiety. That study had 90% of the autistic people who had died or attempted suicide had anxiety. So it's pretty common. And again, investigating using concise, specific language during the assessment, crisis call or text, and then changes in level of anxiety or agitation or sleep issues, always changing from baseline. If you don't know the baseline, you got to kind of dig a little deeper, but if you do know the person you're supporting and you know the baseline, you can see the changes. Feeling trapped is a warning sign of suicide for the general public, but autistic people can't escape their autism. They can't escape how society and our culture treats autistic people. There's no way out. And an autistic person may just be very honest about that and saying that they feel trapped in their autism. But consider if saying the blatant truth about someone's life is, as an autistic person, is a warning sign of suicide, or are they just, kind of giving their experience as an autistic person? And the way to do it, again, is to communicate with them in a way they understand and investigate. So hopelessness, well, it's a myth that autistic people don't have or feel emotions. We just can't always describe them. We don't always feel them, but we have them. And autistic people, being completely honest, may say that they feel hopeless because it's a hopeless situation that they're in. And it may be a word choice and not an emotion. And it could be an emotion. It could be a warning sign of suicide. So considerations are to just really find out, again, what is going on with this autistic person in front of you that you're supporting and helping in a way that they understand. And the reason why I keep saying in the way they understand is because if you are using social nuances and literal figurative speech, you may get the answer. You may get an answer, but not the one you're looking for. Withdrawal for autistic people is a coping mechanism. It's self-care. It's also a warning sign of suicide. It also can be for both autistic and non-autistic people. And again, determining basis in the length of withdrawal. Are they coming out? If somebody withdraws after school or work for a certain period of time, and they come out and they can finish their day, and they're regulated and they're fine, that's good. That's self-care. If they're withdrawing longer and they come out and they're still dysregulated, that might be a cause for concern. And then if you don't know the person, just, investigating, always investigate when assessing an autistic person, using the warning signs of suicide for the general public. This warning sign could be the result of an overactive sympathetic nervous system. Alexithymia and autism can hide strong emotions. And the thing with alexithymia is you may not feel emotions and you may not know what they are. And you might be feeling like, a lot of times what I explain is I'm not feeling that good inside. I don't know what it is. All of a sudden you can be flooded with emotions. And so then you don't know what to do with them all. Or it can be an autistic meltdown. It can look like rage or uncontrolled anger and can't be stopped by will or want, has to run its course. So, keeping the autistic person safe, and just understanding that if you're supporting an autistic person, it could be a sign of suicide and it could be these other things that have to do with autism. Acting reckless or engaging in risky activities, again, can be overthinking, can be perseverating, can be deeply thinking, and you walk into traffic because you're just thinking deeply about something. Confusion because of the environment. Someone may be just dimming as an autistic person and it looks like they're acting reckless or engaging in reckless activities. So understanding these things can be helpful to discern if they're being autistic or if it is a warning sign of suicide. Dramatic mood changes. These can be caused by overwhelming emotions, sensory overload, change, even autistic burnout can have dramatic mood changes. These will be different than autistic meltdowns, and possibly, reframing the situation to help them perceive what happened in a different way could help. But again, that is it autism or is it a suicide warning sign has to still be, investigated using all that same kind of communication that's autistic people can understand. Okay, so this is the last one in the general warning signs. So giving away prized possessions or seeking long-term care for pets. This, I think, is the closest to a real, like a warning sign for an autistic person. Because, there are autistic people who do have strong emotional connections to possessions. And a lot of non-autistic people don't understand that. When I think back to my childhood, I had this little record player that was this size of, I'm probably aging myself here, as a transistor radio. And I remember that fondly, very fondly. I loved that little record player and some other things, that I were possessions that I really loved, and anything to do with a special interest. And I also, this event that happened to me in real life, there was a young boy, maybe 9 or 10 years old, and he always, always, always went everywhere with this little blue car he had. And you didn't see him without the car, not even when he was sleeping, I heard. And one day he came up and with cupped in two hands, he presented the car to me and asked me to keep it for him. Now, he had tears in his eyes, and he knew he loved the car too much, because when I talked to him about it, he just loved it so much he wanted me to keep it for him. And I did, and I checked with him over some years, and I always had it, and now he has it as an adult, and that was okay because he explained, he thought he loved it too much to keep it. But if all of a sudden I saw him without it, and he was, I would be really concerned. And so for autistic people, this really does warrant further investigation in what's going on. So again, autistic people may have other reasons for giving away prized possessions, like that boy did. So again, always investigating, finding out what's going on for the autistic person is very supportive. So this last toolkit is actual warning signs of suicide for autistic people. This is the team that met over a little bit over a year. It consists of researchers, clinicians, autistic people with lived experience. And we produced this proposed set of warning signs of suicide for autistic people based on research and lived experience. And so I'm just going to read through them. We have sudden or increased withdrawal, no words to communicate, acute distress, a current traumatic event, marked increase in rate and or severity of self-harm, worsening of anxiety or depression, a new focus on death-related topics that are not a special interest, perceptive suicidal thoughts and ruminations, seeking means or making plans for suicide or suicidal rehearsal, statements about no reason for living or no sense of purpose in life, and then hopelessness was the last one. So again, looking for baseline, sudden or increased withdrawal, and that would be, research showed us, coupled together with a reduced interest in a special interest, special passion together. Because each of these warning signs comes with a scenario in the resource to go along and show what each one might look like. So each one has one, sometimes have two scenarios. And in the first one, the scenario shows that together, with a reduced interest of a special passion together, that's a warning sign of suicide. No words to communicate acute distress. That's when sometimes autistic people can lose their words and not be able to speak, even though they may have been speaking just a few, maybe an hour, 2 hours, doesn't matter, 10 minutes before. They may have been triggered. They may have just suddenly gone into a crisis because they remembered something, or lost the ability to speak. And so helping them to regulate, giving them other means to communicate is all supportive. Current traumatic event, marked increase in rate of severity of self-harm. And notice here, it's not self-harm, it's an increase of self-harm. A lot of autistic people use self-harm to actually keep themselves regulated, especially those who have alexithymia. Worsening of anxiety or depression, a new focus on death-related topics that are not of special interest, because a lot of autistic people have special interest of suicide. Sometimes it could be suicide of singers or actors or, other historic, important people through history. And the tricky part with that is because autistic people tend to think so much about their special interest that if something does happen and they're already thinking about it, it may quickly go into suicidal ideation. So, there's a lot to know about to kind of support a person who does have a special interest of suicide. Those perseverative suicidal thoughts and ruminations are definitely tricky. And research showed that autistic people did research and make plans before attempting or even dying by suicide when they look back and found that they have been doing that. And then statements about no reason for living or no sense of purpose in life, that has to be determined what's going on there. And then hopelessness. So some main points from the 3 toolkits that I just shared with you is to watch for changes in baseline as far as withdrawal, regulating, anxiety, self-harm, or depression. Those are the kind of main highlighting things to watch out for. Again, you need to know the person kind of to know the baseline. Although, clinicians, therapists, other supportive people can know them through working with them over months, but just knowing that these are difficulties to watch for changes for is supportive. Knowing that autistic people in crisis may not behave like non-autistic people in crisis. This is such an important piece of information, because so many people go and fall through the cracks because they're not acting like supportive people think they kind of should or would act if they were in a crisis. So it's so important to remember. Some people actually feel, calm. I mean, they feel good if the person is calm, but for autistic people, that doesn't mean good at all. They could be in more of a crisis if they're calm than if they're, visibly upset, because everything just suddenly went internal. Think of like an implosion, kind of all went internal, and they're still in a state of crisis, but they can't get out words, or they can't get out any means of asking for help. They're in a tricky situation. It is very, very tricky, but some of the things to watch out for would be if the autistic person is talking and all of a sudden they go quiet. If the autistic person can't talk about the crisis that they're in, but they can say other things like, okay, I'll see you. Like if it's a therapy session and they say, okay, is your appointment set for next week? Yeah. Okay, I'll see you next week. Okay, bye. And they can do that, but they can't talk. But just in therapy, like they lost the ability to talk about what the crisis was or what the difficulty was. That person should not be let go. They should understand that, okay, they can still talk about this, but they can't talk about the crisis. That's a big warning sign that they are having difficulty and have lost the ability to communicate because they're in a crisis. And then to understand that they may not be able to verbalize emotions or what they're experiencing, again, due to alexithymia, but especially teenagers and young kids, if you say, are you okay? And they can't, kind of say that they're okay, they can fall through the cracks. It's really offering them, can you tell me another time you felt this way, and have them think about something. And okay, it was when, like I said before, nobody came to my birthday party is kind of how I'm feeling right now. And so there are other ways to find out, even though someone can't say, I'm feeling very sad, I'm feeling very lonely, I'm feeling, maybe like I'm going to hurt myself. I don't feel good about myself. If they can't say that, there's other ways to find out. Also, that new focus on death-related topics, discerning between a special passion and suicidal thoughts and behaviors can be tricky. Because again, we don't want to put somebody through the possible unintentional harm of going to the ER or even calling a crisis line and getting somebody on the other end who doesn't understand autism if it's just their special interest. So we want to make sure before, we have to move an autistic person to some of the different places that they go if they're having suicidal thoughts and behaviors. We want to make sure they really are having suicidal thoughts and behaviors. They may research ways to die by suicide. And then also, this is something that's really, really misunderstood, is what may be traumatic to an autistic person could be different than what causes trauma in non-autistic people. And a lot of times autistic people get invalidated because they're told, well, that wasn't that bad. But what the non-autistic person doesn't understand is it might not have been, the thing. It was the thing that happened and all the noise in the environment and the temperature and the lights. And this happened earlier, and this happened the day before, and I can't catch up to any of them. And this was the kind of straw that broke that camel's back. I just use figurative language. I know. But, so really believing, research has shown that autistic people say they're not believed when they're in a crisis. And this is kind of why, because, there's some ableism in there. If you can do it, if I can do it, you can do it. But it's not that way for autistic people. Autistic people just have a different experience. And, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to, lunch or gotten a cup of coffee in a Starbucks or something, and everybody else is having a good time. And I can't wait to leave. All the clinking of the glasses and the talking and the noise and just the crowd of people and the lights. I can't wait to get out of there. And everyone, and then, that kind of makes you feel alone. But when you're having a crisis, it's even worse when you're not believed. So again, those words that an autistic person says when they're in a crisis has to have a lot of weight. Okay, so in conclusion, we all have a role to play in suicidal prevention efforts. Learning directly from autistic people with lived experience of suicidality is going to be really, really important because of those different ways that they experience life. Like I just explained my Starbucks experience. No one's going to understand if they're not autistic unless an autistic person tells them. And so learning directly from autistic people who've lived experience of suicide is just, very helpful if that's possible. Don't be afraid to ask about suicidal thoughts, but ask it literally and listen to the answer literally. Because an autistic person is going to listen literally and they're going to talk literally. But research has shown that you're not going to put the idea of suicide in someone's head if you ask them that if they're about to die by suicide or if they're thinking about dying by suicide. So it's not like you're going to harm anyone by asking. If you're concerned, the best thing to do is to just ask and ask in a blunt, clear way with few words as possible, getting straight to the point. And a lot of times, many, many, many times, the autistic person is glad that the conversation is finally being talked about because they didn't know how to begin it, or they didn't know what to say or who to talk to. But if it's opened up for them, they have a chance now to say, yes, I've been thinking about this. So, yeah, kind of open those doors would be, helpful and supportive. And remember that autistic distress may not look like neurotypical distress. So you cannot decide kind of, if you're a supportive person and you're supporting a person, decide the level of crisis based on what the autistic person is doing. It's not going to be a true assessment. Everything may be happening on the inside. and then make use of the resources. They're all free downloadable resources off of my website. And, you know, there, you can find them in different other websites on suicide prevention or from organizations. And then advocate for more autism specific training for crisis center workers, emergency department clinicians, other mental health professionals, because autistic people are in all of those places and they need everybody to understand, you know, what's been in these resources and what I've said in this training. And we are at time. That went by really fast.
That did. And I mean, we started a little bit late and you're just like right on time where you said you would be. That's kind of impressive at times for speakers. So well done. I am going to take off the spotlight so that we can all join each other. We do have a couple of questions or comments in the chat. But first of all, I want to say thank you. This was really, this was information that I really wanted because I had a taste from listening before. It's like, I want to know more. So thank you so much for
And
that.
Yeah, I
you
hope
do.
it wasn't too repetitive for you.
Nope, not at all.
And this is the first time I've ever done sitting, just having this sort of talk before and listening to someone else going, yeah, no, I feel the same exact way sometimes, or I understand what they are talking about because I feel this at times. It's actually kind of amazing for once to sit in someone's shoes and actually someone else's shoes for once and listen to what someone else has to say that's walked almost the same sort of path I have.
Yeah. Yeah, your nodding was, you know, it was helping me too. I was like being validated by Hunter's nods.
Aw.
Oh, he's walked this road.
Yep.
So that's why I was really happy you could join me tonight. Julie would like to know more about how someone could just have exhaustion and shut down for a day or longer after feeling stressed. I don't know if you need clarification on that or
Is she asking if that would be concerning?
oh, good question. I'll watch the chat. So are you looking to, would that be concerning if someone got exhausted and shut down for a day or two after being stressed? Or are you, Julie, if you could just tell us a little bit more in chat, we'll try to figure that out. Oh, so her daughter seems to just get exhausted and shuts down when she gets stressed. So is that, have you seen that in other people? Is that worrisome, or is this possibly just her way of dealing with the stress?
I kind of hear about it I kind of hear about it in my coaching clients. And I also experience it myself. I call it the wall. I just say, you know, I hit the wall and I cannot move for the life of me when that happens. And oftentimes I'm staring at the ceiling and I'm like willing my body to get up and do something. And it can be caught, she can be using so much energy to go to school that, yeah, when she gets home, she crashes. That does not surprise me at all. And yes, I am sure she, like I said, I am willing myself to get up and do something. Sometimes I can catch it and I will say to myself, okay, you know, I'm pretty rule based. So for 1 hour, I'm going to do nothing and try to kind of alleviate it a little bit. And sometimes that works. But on those days where that wall is up and thick and I cannot move it, I have learned over the years to work with it. And so, yes, there's nothing that I know of that can stop it except for rest and self-care. And so she may need that. She just may need to, you know, like you said, crash and do nothing.
So we also have a question about how any suggestions about how to get this information to other people? So we have an occupational therapist who's on tonight. Are there campaigns or are there ways to bring more awareness to these considerations for suicide? You know, besides doing these one-off things that we're doing, what other ideas have you seen to try to bring
Well,
awareness to this?
It's actually a conversation that, the autistic adults that I work with in this field are, kind of always talking about, how can we, you know, bring this, to education, to the mental health field, to, how can we, my dream is to get it into universities so it's taught the first time right ar- and but like I'm in a master's degree program right now to be a social worker, and I cannot get through to my professors that I advocate to. And there's nothing in the curriculum about autistic people or communicating or supporting autistic people, and when I bring it up I get shut down pretty fast.
Hmm.
So we got a long way to go, but just sharing the resources, presentations like this one, somebody tells somebody else and somebody tells somebody else and somebody tells somebody else. So it's that's one, like a grassroots kind of effort. But just, continuing to talk about it is really all the things that we have come up with so far. It's really kind of hard because if we had more research to say, look, research shows that,
Right.
we can get faster in policy and change some things, but we don't have that research. And the research that we do have, now that more researchers are looking into having autistic people, like that community council I belong to, ASSET, kind of inform not only research priorities, but research, like the hypothesis of research studies. And if it's going to be a qualitative research study, which a lot of them are, to word the questions correctly. For autistic people, they have studies out there for autistic people to find out information like this, and they ask the questions very figuratively,
Mhm.
in just ways that autistic people can answer them, but it's not really always the answer that they're looking for.
Yep.
So, they don't even, there are some researchers more and more are asking autistic adults, like, how do we word this so you understand
Mhm.
how, and having autistic people be part of the process, which is so much better, but not everybody's on board with that either.
Yeah, that reminds me, we do the Southern Regional Centers at the Wasteman Center, and they're really we do a lot of research. We meaning they, not me. But really trying to get to that more community engaged participatory research where it's not just, hey, do you think this works? Or hey, can you join? But having them at the beginning, having whoever it's trying to be studied, setting out how to study it because they're the experts in it.
Yeah,
And
it
it's
makes a
really,
lot of sense, doesn't it?
doesn't it? And it's so hard to so yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's a little struggle.
I love
Um,
using cats and dogs because cats and dogs are just so, like, people understand them so well, but it's almost like trying to find out about cats by watching and researching dogs,
yes.
Yep.
Yes.
That's
and you
not
just
going to
can't
work.
do it.
That is never going to work out right.
Um, so there's a follow-up just based on your experience and everything you talked about tonight. Do you think it would be appropriate for like a 16-year-old that we were talking about before in that scenario about hitting the wall and being overwhelmed? Do you think it would be okay for her to like watch this and then have a discussion about it afterwards?
Oh, that would definitely be a parental decision,
Okay.
because it would depend on, you know, I think, I've had 4 teenagers so far, and each of them are different, and I probably would decide to let maybe 1 or 2 of them out of my kids watch it, but there were a couple where I would have to say no. So it really would depend on the person. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So Allison says, thank you. She is feeling the same way, that there is a lot of information that's lacking in the curriculums around autism and mental health. And I very much agree with her. So she appreciates the insight.
You're welcome.
As do we.
Yep.
Do you have any questions or further?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. Just glad you asked me to be a part of this.
Yeah. Sometimes I drag him with stuff and he's not happy that I made him be a part of it.
Yeah. This is the one time I'm actually proud of it. Of that.
Well, I'd like to ask a question if people would be willing to answer.
Mhm.
I'm curious, how much do you understand what I was talking about as far as unintentional harm?
Feel free to unmute if you would like, and I can call on you then, or you could put answers into the chat. So how much do you identify or understand the concept of unintentional harm that Lisa talked about in the beginning? I mean, I have my answer, but I want to hear other people's before.
Yeah, I want to
I
hear.
express mine.
I want to hear other people what they say.
Like, do you see it? Do you understand it? Do you see where it could happen in like the call centers, especially this? I think about, Lisa, it made me think about how we have just had this huge promotion of 988.
Mhm.
And you're having a crisis, call 988. You're suicidal, call 988. And whether that's actually the best option for some people.
Unfortunately.
So we have some answers in the chat. I believe that I have done unintentional harm because I don't understand what I was doing and it didn't fit her situation. And so making suggestions or something without understanding.
Mhm.
So again, not sure, but are you talking about imposing my interpretation on someone's behavior on them? Assuming instead of asking? Is that sort of what you're talking about with intentional harm?
Yep, that could be it. And then, as far as some of the, unintentional harm, for me, when I started talking about unintentional harm, it was from the night I found my husband. So I had a police officer put his hand on my shoulder as a encouraging gesture. He also kind of kept it on there as he walked me across the street to go talk to the sergeant. I felt that hand on my shoulder for months afterwards when I thought about that night. I could feel that hand on my shoulder. Reason is because I didn't know it was coming. He didn't ask. So that would be unintentional harm. The victim advocate asking me to interact with her therapy dog when dogs are a sensory, just too many sensory things for me with dogs. And so I'm a cat person. And I kept asking her, no, I kept saying, no, I need to pace. And she kept trying to get me to interact with her dog and I needed to pace. That whole, like, having to go back and say no and feel bad about saying no and then not being able to pace like I needed to was unintentional harm. What's going on in the chat again? Let's see.
Just talking a little bit more about how some unintentional harm, that maybe having someone meet standards that aren't realistic for the person, expecting them to behave or do a certain way, because then not only are they not doing what you would ask them to do or want them to, but then they feel bad about it.
Yep.
And they, I'm letting you down because I'm not doing what you want me to do, but I don't know how to do that. And so that can pile on some of those feelings. And as one of the things that you were saying earlier about that overreacting, looking at the behavior without looking inside and talking about the inside. So there's also something in there about that. have a comment about with an adolescent son, the practical approach, and understanding that I don't know how I feel is an appropriate response. It is a real thing.
Sometimes when I'm supporting people and they can't tell me what they feel, I ask them what they're thinking about.
So just change that around. What are you?
Because it's
what's your
easier to,
brain?
yeah, it's much easier to say what they're thinking about than how they're feeling.
Yeah, that's one of the things I don't know if it's specific with autistic people, but I find I like to ask, so what are you saying to yourself? What's going on inside right now? What are you saying? What are the words that you're hearing?
Yeah.
And that can sometimes help.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I really like, as far as unintentional harm, I think it's doing something you think is beneficial, but actually causes harm due to you not recognizing the individual's needs. That is that's
That-
pretty much it.
That's
Yeah.
that's an awesome with
Yeah,
few
that
words.
is,
Way to
that is
go.
an amazing definition of unintentional harm.
Yeah, and this whole sense of, when, like a daughter diagnosed beginning of COVID and receiving no support, is that it's also important. It's also self-care for me as a parent is also very important. That
Mhm.
if I am running on fumes, if I am too much into myself, if I'm not healthy and regulated, then it's a lot better chance I'm going to miss something. I'm not going to spend the time to look and ask about the inside. And so my self-care is important to my being able to identify those changes that you were talked about.
Yeah.
From the base, that change from the baseline. But if I'm not taking care of myself, I might miss those. And so now part of my desire for self-care is also taking care of others as well.
And before I got myself checked into a mental hospital to get the help I needed, I was wearing masks for every person I interacted with. I put up every sort of barrier and wall I could around every emotion I felt. And I just took that whole idea of masking to the worst extreme possible and just straight up did not want to show any emotion to anyone.
Yeah.
And it just broke. And
Yeah, well, that's exhausting on so many ways. And
it was very just so exhausting. And then having one family death, then another, then losing a childhood friend. And it just shattered completely.
Yeah, and that does seem to happen a lot to autistic people, including myself, is there's not enough catch up and coping between incidents. And the incidences happen, not daily, but multiple times a day because of because it could be an environment you just in, because you went grocery shopping. It could be somebody you just talked to who is upset with you and you don't know why. You did something, but you don't know what it was. Or, just so many things can happen in a day and you can't catch up. And then something big happens another day and you're still not caught up from those days before. And it just, yeah, it's perpetual, really.
Yeah.
Because the world was not made for us. So there's many, many ways that we can get those experiences of, oh, something happened. I need to process it. I don't have time because something else just happened.
Well, I will work on getting this video out tomorrow. I will attach the links to the toolkits and I will get those sent out as well to everybody who has registered for tonight or who registered and showed up. We appreciate you just slightly more than the people that just registered. Okay, appreciate you a whole lot more because I love it when people show up.
Yeah, you don't have to learn through a secondhand recording.
That's right. So Lisa, I will get that compiled and I'll get that all sent out to people, but I really appreciate your time, your years of work on this, your efforts with the AAS and everything that you've been doing. And I really appreciate you trying to keep people alive.
Mhm.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here tonight too. I really enjoy this. I need a hunter on every presentation nodding at me. That was wonderful.
He's a pretty good man.
Yeah, I try my best to be.
All right, I'm gonna stop the recording and then we can chat a little bit more.